The studio lights burned bright, casting long shadows across the stage where Kellyanne Conway and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat opposite each other. The show's host had barely finished the introduction when Conway leaned forward, her voice sharp and heated. "This administration is a disaster," she declared, her tone rising as if each word carried the weight of an accusation. "And people like Jasmine Crockett, who defend this chaos, are part of the reason America is falling apart." The audience gasped at the sudden outburst. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of Conway's anger. Her words spilled into a full-blown rant, filled with rapid-fire accusations and interruptions that left the host momentarily speechless. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She sat perfectly composed, her hands folded neatly on the desk, her expression calm and almost amused. She let Conway finish her tirade without a single interruption, watching with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew how the exchange would end. When Conway finally paused to catch her breath, the room went silent, waiting to see how Crockett would respond. Jasmine leaned slightly toward her microphone, her calm voice a sharp contrast to the storm that had just erupted across the stage. "Kellyanne," she began softly, almost like she was addressing a restless child, "you've spoken for several minutes, but not once have you offered a single fact. You've thrown out accusations, but when it comes to solutions, there's nothing." The audience murmured. Some clapped lightly, sensing where this was headed. Conway's jaw tightened, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Crockett continued, her tone steady, her eyes locked directly on her opponent. "You call this administration chaos, yet I see jobs returning, healthcare expanding, and communities being heard for the first time in years. What exactly are you calling disaster? Progress?" The host raised his brows, clearly impressed. Conway tried to cut in, but Crockett simply raised a hand slightly, not to silence her opponent rudely, but to hold the floor with firm confidence. "Facts matter," Crockett said, leaning back now, still poised. "And the American people deserve more than shouting matches and recycled talking points. They deserve truth." The studio erupted in applause, the contrast between Conway's fury and Crockett's calm precision impossible to ignore. Kellyanne Conway's face flushed as the applause echoed through the studio. She leaned forward again, refusing to let the moment slip away. "Truth?" she scoffed, her voice sharp and biting. "Congresswoman, you wouldn't recognize truth if it stood on this stage in flashing lights. What this administration calls progress is nothing but reckless spending, weak leadership, and a country on the edge of collapse." Her words came rapid fire, each one louder than the last. The host attempted to interject, but Conway's rant rolled over him like a wave. Jasmine, however, didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move. Instead, she let the storm rage until it burned itself out. Only then did she lean into her microphone, her tone calm, clear, and cutting. "You see," Crockett began, "this is the difference between the two of us. You shout. I lead. You dramatize. I legislate. And while you keep talking about collapse, the reality is people are finally getting relief after years of neglect." The crowd erupted once more, clapping and cheering. Even the host struggled to hide a grin at how effortlessly Crockett had turned the tables. Conway blinked rapidly, caught between anger and disbelief. She hadn't expected Crockett to stay so composed, much less to dismantle her argument with so few words. Kellyanne Conway shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly rattled by the wave of applause that had just rolled through the studio. Still, she wasn't about to surrender the spotlight. "You can sit there acting calm all you want," Conway snapped, pointing a finger toward Crockett, "but the truth is, you're defending policies that weaken America. People can clap all night, but clapping doesn't pay the bills or make our streets safer." Her words struck with force, but the desperation in her tone was impossible to miss. Jasmine Crockett tilted her head slightly, her expression unbothered. She let the silence linger for a moment, allowing Conway's words to hang in the air like smoke. Then she replied, her voice soft but piercing. "Kellyanne, Do you realize that while you rant about weakening America, families are finally seeing their wages go up, children are accessing healthcare their parents couldn't afford before, and infrastructure is being rebuilt in communities long forgotten? That's not weakness, that's strength. The audience roared again, some rising to their feet. The contrast was unmistakable, Conway's fury against Crockett's measured, undeniable clarity. The host leaned forward, his tone almost teasing as he said, "Kellyanne, do you want to respond? Or should we let Congresswoman Crockett keep teaching this masterclass?" Conway's face stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line as the crowd erupted in laughter. Kellyanne Conway straightened in her chair, her jaw tight as the laughter from the crowd stung. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and leaned into the microphone. "Masterclass," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If that's what you call it, then America is in real trouble. Congresswoman Crockett is talking like she's reading from a fairy tale book. Real people are suffering, and no amount of calm tone or rehearsed lines can change that." She gestured dramatically toward the audience, trying to win them back. "Don't be fooled by this performance. Washington insiders like her live in comfort while everyday Americans are left behind." The crowd murmured, but Jasmine didn't react defensively. Instead, she allowed Conway's words to settle before leaning forward with quiet authority. "Kellyanne," Crockett said firmly, "you keep calling this a performance. But the truth is, I don't need to perform. I live this. Every day, I sit with families who are struggling, I hear their stories, and I fight for them on the floor of Congress. That's not comfort, that's commitment." The room erupted again, the applause louder and longer than before. Conway's attempt to reclaim momentum had slipped further out of reach. The host smirked, clearly sensing the imbalance growing with each exchange. "Congresswoman, it seems your calm counterpoints are hitting harder than any shouting could." Conway's lips tightened, frustration flashing in her eyes. Kellyanne Conway's frustration was now on full display. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the desk, her voice rising to a near shout. "You're twisting reality, Jasmine. People are worse off now than ever before. Inflation is eating their paychecks, crime is skyrocketing, and this so-called leadership you're defending is a disaster." Her words echoed through the studio, but this time the audience didn't cheer. Instead, a few scattered boos and groans rippled from the crowd, signaling that Conway's outburst was starting to wear thin. Jasmine Crockett remained perfectly still. She waited until Conway's voice trailed off, then leaned forward, her calmness cutting sharper than any raised tone. "Kellyanne," she said softly, "I understand why you're shouting. It's easier to yell than it is to admit that facts don't support your claims. Crime rates are actually trending downward, job growth is strong, and inflation is finally easing. These aren't fairy tales. They're numbers. They're reality." The studio erupted in applause once again, but Crockett didn't pause for it this time. She pressed on, her voice unwavering. "The problem isn't that America is failing. The problem is that some people would rather see it fail than admit progress is being made. That's not patriotism. That's sabotage." The audience shot to its feet, cheering wildly. The host couldn't hide his grin as the cameras caught Conway's face, tight, flushed, and visibly shaken. For the first time that evening, it looked like Kellyanne Conway was running out of steam. Kellyanne Conway forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow under the weight of the crowd's cheers for Jasmine. She brushed her hair back, trying to regain her composure, and leaned toward the microphone with a smirk. "Nice speech, Congresswoman," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be honest, your numbers are cherry-picked. You politicians always find a way to spin data. The reality is, people feel unsafe, they feel poorer, and they don't trust your so-called progress." She paused, flashing a glance at the cameras as if to rally viewers at home. "And frankly, the American people aren't fooled by your calm act. They see right through it." The audience went quiet, waiting for Crockett's response. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled faintly, as if Conway had just opened the door for her. "You're right about one thing, Kellyanne," Crockett began evenly. "The American people aren't fooled. They're smarter than that. They know when someone is shouting just to distract from the truth. They know the difference between anger and answers. And tonight," she gestured calmly to the audience, "they can see exactly who is offering which." The applause thundered, drowning out Conway's attempt to interject. Crockett simply sat back, her expression composed, while Conway's smirk faltered. The host leaned forward, shaking his head with a grin. "Kellyanne, I think Congresswoman Crockett just summarized the entire debate in one line." The camera zoomed in on Conway's face as she shifted in her chair, clearly rattled. Kellyanne Conway gripped her notes tightly, her knuckles whitening as she searched for something, anything, that could shift the momentum back her way. She leaned forward again, her voice sharp, but this time with a hint of desperation. "Jasmine, you can talk in circles all night, but people are living paycheck to paycheck, gas prices are up, and families are struggling to survive. You're defending failure, plain and simple." Her words rang out, but instead of cheers, there was only a low murmur from the crowd. The energy was gone from her corner. Jasmine Crockett slowly adjusted her microphone, her eyes locked on Conway, her tone still calm and steady. "Kellyanne," she began, "families have always struggled, but the difference now is they're not invisible anymore. Relief checks, job programs, affordable healthcare, these are real lifelines. And while you stand here shouting about failure, I stand in Congress every day fighting for those very families you claim to care about." The applause began to swell, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, her words precise, each one like a stone dropping into the silence. "Let me be clear, leadership isn't about screaming the loudest. It's about delivering results. And if you can't recognize progress when it's right in front of you, then maybe the problem isn't America, it's your refusal to see it." The audience erupted, clapping and cheering louder than at any point before. Some even stood, chanting Jasmine's name. The host raised his eyebrows, smiling as he turned toward Conway. "Kellyanne, it seems the crowd has already decided who they believe tonight." Conway's forced smile collapsed into a scowl as the cameras captured every flicker of her frustration. Kellyanne Conway's composure finally cracked. She slammed her hand on the desk, startling even the host, her voice rising to a full-throated shout. "This is ridiculous. You're lying to the American people, Jasmine. You sit there acting calm, but you're nothing more than a polished puppet for a failed administration. And you think applause from this crowd makes you right? It doesn't." Her voice echoed through the studio, sharp and bitter. The audience gasped at the sudden burst of anger, and a few scattered boos followed. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flare of frustration in her eyes. Jasmine Crockett, however, didn't so much as blink. She leaned back in her chair, letting Conway's tirade burn itself out. Then she leaned forward slowly, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "Kellyanne, thank you for proving my point." The crowd froze for a moment, then burst into laughter and applause. Crockett continued, her words deliberate and precise. "You just told America exactly what this conversation has been, shouting, finger-pointing, and anger. Meanwhile, I've given facts, solutions, and a vision. One of us is leading, and one of us is losing control." The audience roared to its feet, cheering so loudly the host had to raise his hand for order. Conway's face flushed deep red as she shook her head, but her silence said everything. For the first time that night, it was clear, Jasmine Crockett had completely flipped the stage in her favor. The studio was alive with noise, cheers, applause, even a few chants of "Crockett. Crockett." Kellyanne Conway sat stiff in her chair, her eyes darting toward the cameras, desperate to reclaim control of the narrative. She leaned forward once more, her tone sharp but shaky. "You can gloat all you want, Congresswoman, but when this show ends, Americans will still wake up tomorrow with higher bills, higher gas prices, and more uncertainty about their future. Your calm words don't change reality. She crossed her arms tightly, as if bracing herself. The audience quieted, waiting for Jasmine's response. Jasmine Crockett exhaled softly, her composure unshaken. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice even and deliberate, cutting through the tension like a knife. Kellyanne, here's the reality, shouting doesn't put food on the table. Scare tactics don't pay the bills. What changes lives are policies that lift people up, not drag them down. And while you stand here angry, I'll continue to stand in Congress delivering results. The crowd exploded in applause again, but Jasmine wasn't done. She leaned back, her final words delivered with quiet precision. And maybe that's why, despite all your noise, the American people are tired of listening to you, and ready to move forward with leaders who actually get things done. The audience leapt to their feet, the applause deafening. The host smiled knowingly as the camera cut to Conway's face, frozen, tight-lipped, and visibly humiliated. It was clear, Jasmine Crockett had just ended the debate with a knockout blow. Kellyanne Conway sat rigid, her eyes narrowing as the audience's cheers echoed around her. She wasn't ready to let the night end with her looking defeated. She gripped the desk edge, leaning forward with a forced, biting smile. You can enjoy your little standing ovation, Jasmine, she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt, but history won't remember applause. History will remember the failures you defended. When people can't afford rent or groceries, they won't think of your calm tone, they'll think of the broken promises you stood by. The audience went quiet, the tension rising again. Conway's words carried weight, but her tone betrayed desperation. She had thrown her last dart, hoping it would land. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush to reply. She sat still for a moment, then leaned into the microphone, her eyes steady, her voice calm yet cutting. You're right, Kellyanne. History will remember. But it won't remember the applause tonight, it will remember the difference between those who shouted about problems and those who actually worked to solve them. The crowd erupted, louder than before. Crockett continued, her words flowing like a final verdict. And years from now, when people look back, they won't say, Kellyanne Conway was right. They'll say, Kellyanne Conway shouted. Jasmine Crockett delivered. The audience rose as one, thunderous applause shaking the studio. The host laughed under his breath, shaking his head. I don't think it gets clearer than that. Conway's smirk vanished, her face tightening as she realized the cameras had just captured her final defeat in real time. The energy in the studio was electric, the roar of the crowd refusing to die down after Jasmine Crockett's sharp final words. The host tried to bring the audience back to order, but the cheers carried on like a wave, drowning out anything Kellyanne Conway might have wanted to say. Conway sat frozen, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flickering nervously toward the cameras. For a woman known for dominating interviews with fiery rebuttals, the silence surrounding her now was deafening. She had no comeback left. Jasmine, on the other hand, sat with an almost serene smile, her composure unchanged from the very beginning. She hadn't shouted once. She hadn't broken her calm. And yet, she had dismantled every one of Conway's attacks until nothing remained but noise. The host finally leaned into his microphone, grinning. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think the verdict tonight is clear. Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for showing us what calm, fact-based leadership looks like. Kellyanne, thank you as well for your passion. The audience erupted in laughter, the jab landing like salt on Conway's open wound. Cameras zoomed in one last time, catching the stark contrast, Conway's scowl beside Crockett's composed, confident smile. As the closing music began to play, the host signed off, but the moment was already destined to go viral, Kellyanne Conway erupting in anger, only to be calmly and methodically humiliated by Jasmine Crockett's steady precision. The show ended, but the debate was far from over. Within minutes of the broadcast wrapping, clips of the exchange between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett began flooding social media. One clip in particular, the moment Jasmine calmly said, "Kellyanne, thank you for proving my point," spread like wildfire. It was shared, reshared, and captioned with phrases like, "the calmest shutdown in history," and asterisk, "Crockett didn't raise her voice once, but she ended her." Asterisk. On Twitter, hashtags like #CrockettCalm and #KellyannMeltdown trended almost instantly. TikTok at its layered Conway's furious shouting over Jasmine's quiet, devastating responses, turning the debate into a viral sensation. Meanwhile, news outlets began replaying the exchange on loop. Commentators praised Crockett's composure, noting how rare it was to see someone dismantle such a fiery opponent without ever losing their cool. Kellyanne, however, was left on the defensive. Her team rushed out statements, trying to spin the night as a biased crowd moment, but the internet had already made up its mind. Memes poured in, showing Conway red-faced and shouting while Crockett sat calmly, captioned with lines like, asterisk, "one of these women lost control, and it wasn't Jasmine." Asterisk. By the next morning, it was clear, the debate wasn't remembered for Conway's rant, it was remembered for Crockett's composure. What began as an eruption ended as a humiliation, with Jasmine Crockett standing taller than ever in the eyes of the public. The morning after the debate, the ripple effects were everywhere. News networks replayed Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Kellyanne Conway on a loop. Headlines splashed across screens, "Crockett stays cool while Conway erupts," and asterisk, "viral debate moment leaves Conway shaken." Asterisk. Late-night hosts joined in, joking about the contrast between Conway's shouting and Crockett's quiet precision. One quipped, asterisk, "Kellyanne brought a megaphone, Jasmine brought receipts, and receipts always win." Asterisk. The audience laughed, but the message was clear, Crockett had dominated. Politicians weighed in, too. Some praised Jasmine's restraint, calling it a masterclass in composure under fire. Others quietly admitted that Conway's meltdown had done more damage than any opponent could have inflicted. On social media, the momentum only grew. Millions of views piled onto Crockett's clips, and hashtags kept trending. Young voters in particular praised her as the future of politics, admiring her ability to shut down chaos with clarity. Kellyanne Conway, however, kept a low profile. She released a short statement claiming she had been passionate, not rattled, but the viral videos told a different story. Every angle, every clip showed the same truth: she had erupted, and Jasmine Crockett had calmly left her humiliated. By the end of the week, the moment had cemented itself as one of the most talked about political clashes of the year, a turning point where Crockett's poise not only won the night but elevated her standing on the national stage. And for Kellyanne Conway, the image of her red-faced fury against Crockett's unshaken calm would follow her far longer than she ever anticipated.